There is something living inside the wood around your home, right now. You can't see it, you can't hear it, and chances are you've walked past it hundreds of times without ever noticing. The first signs are usually small. A little pile of sawdust beneath a fence, a tiny hole in a porch post, a trail of large black ants disappearing into a crack in the wall. Most people see that and assume the story is obvious. The wood is being destroyed. The ants are to blame. But what if that's only part of the truth? Because the strange thing is, these creatures don't actually eat wood. At least, not in the way most people think. So why do they spend years carving deep tunnels inside it? What are they searching for? And why do the places where they appear attract more attention from experts than the ants themselves? That's when the story becomes truly fascinating. Because behind that seemingly lifeless piece of wood, there may be an entire city. A city with no blueprint, no leader, no commands of any kind. And yet thousands of residents work together with near-perfect coordination. But that city isn't the biggest secret. The biggest secret is why it was built there in the first place. And when scientists finally discovered the answer, they realized that homeowners had misunderstood these ants for decades. So who is leaving behind those little piles of sawdust? The first suspect is usually a familiar resident of old fences, wooden porches, and the dark corners around a home. They are known as carpenter ants. These are among the largest ants you are likely to encounter around your property. They tend to appear in places where wood has been exposed to the passage of time. An aging tree trunk, a porch post weathered by years of sun and rain, a forgotten corner of a shed, or sometimes, hidden inside walls you still believe are perfectly sound. The moment many homeowners spot these black workers, one thought immediately comes to mind. Damage, rotting wood, expensive repairs. Because most people assume that any creature tunneling through wood must be feeding on the wood itself. It sounds reasonable, but the real story is far more fascinating. Because these tiny workers do not eat wood. Pause for a moment and think about that. If their food does not come from the wood, why would an entire colony spend years carving intricate passageways inside it? Why do they choose certain pieces of wood while completely ignoring others? And why do the places where they leave their traces often attract more attention from building experts than the ants themselves? That is where the story begins to change. Because those tunnels are not the remains of a meal. They are more like a survey. A survey taking place quietly in places most of us never think to look. And to understand what these tiny residents are searching for, we need to follow them deep inside the wood. The tunnels do not lead to food. When entomologists began cutting open pieces of wood inhabited by carpenter ants, they discovered something surprising. The interior looked nothing like a feeding site. There were no half-chewed wood fragments, no signs of digestion, no evidence whatsoever that the wood was being used as food. Instead, they found long, remarkably clean passageways, smooth walls, orderly intersections, large chambers capable of housing thousands of individuals. They looked more like rooms than bite marks, more like a carefully planned city than a site of destruction. Every tunnel served a purpose. Every chamber was designed for a specific function. Some areas were reserved for larvae, others for eggs, others for developing young. And when researchers stepped back and looked at the entire structure, they began to realize that these tiny workers had not come here to feed. They had come here to settle. But that raised another question. If their goal was to build a city, why not choose just any piece of wood? Why would one fence post become occupied, while the one beside it remained completely untouched? That is when the real secret begins to reveal itself. The seekers of weakness. In nature, these workers almost always ignore healthy trees. Instead, they appear in places that are already changing, places where decay has begun from within, places invaded by fungi, places where moisture has been creeping in for months or even years. This is something many homeowners never realize. Their presence is often not the cause, it is the consequence. In other words, when a colony appears inside a piece of wood, the story often began long before the ants arrived. It might have started with a small leak in the roof, a gap around a window, a corner of a shed that never fully dries after a rainstorm. While you remained completely unaware of those changes, the surveyors in the shadows detected them long ago. Because what they are searching for is not wood. It is weakness, not life, but the earliest signs of decay. And that is why many building experts view them very differently. They do not simply see a colony of ants. They see a signal, a warning, But if these residents are so skilled at finding weak points, how do they discover them in the first place? The scouts in the shadows. Every colony begins with a few individuals searching, not for food, not for prey, but for a suitable place to expand their city. As night falls and most of the neighborhood drifts off to sleep, these scouts begin to emerge. They travel along fences, move across tree trunks, explore gaps around windows, inspect wooden beams beneath porches. And what is truly remarkable is that they do not need to see what they are searching for. They sense it. Moisture, the scent of decaying wood, tiny chemical changes that humans cannot detect at all. To us, it is just an ordinary piece of wood. To these scouts, it is a map filled with signals, an invitation, a sign that the structure is beginning to weaken. When one individual finds a suitable location, it does not claim the site for itself. It returns home, leaving behind an invisible chemical trail, a message for the entire colony. And within just a few weeks, a place that was once visited by a single scout can become the destination of hundreds of workers. But this is where the story becomes truly fascinating. Because these workers do more than find weak spots. Sometimes, they discover a problem before the homeowner does. A warning that is often misunderstood. Imagine discovering a colony of carpenter ants inside your shed. The first reaction is almost always the same: get rid of them. But what happens if the ants disappear while the cause remains? The leak is still there, the moisture is still there, the decay continues. Only the warning signal is gone. That is why many home inspectors do not focus only on the ants. They focus on where the ants appear. Because in many cases, these residents are pointing to a much larger problem. A support beam that is beginning to weaken. A door frame that has been holding moisture for years. A hidden space inside a wall where dampness is quietly building up. These tiny workers did not create those problems. They simply found them. And sometimes their presence helps homeowners discover damage before it becomes severe. But that is still not the most surprising part, because despite being famous for living in wood, most of their food comes from somewhere else entirely. The night shift no one ever sees. As the sun sets and the neighborhood grows quiet, another world begins to wake up. The workers leave their tunnels, one by one, then dozens, then hundreds. They spread out in different directions, disappearing into the darkness beneath fences, along garden beds, and into corners of the yard that few people notice during the day. If you could watch the area through an infrared camera, you would see something very different from the image of a simple household pest. You would see patrols, search missions, hunts, a caterpillar feeding on leaves under the cover of darkness, a larva hiding beneath a layer of fallen leaves, a small insect emerging from its shelter. To us, these are invisible creatures of the night. To the workers roaming through the garden, they are food. One by one, they are discovered. One by one, they are carried away. One by one, they disappear from the small ecosystem surrounding your home. While you are asleep, while the lights are off, while the entire neighborhood sits in silence. An army is working out there, and most of us never realize it is happening. But those nightly patrols are only part of the story. Because when dawn arrives, everything collected during the night returns to one place. A place very few people have ever seen. The city inside the wood. From the outside, it is just an old fence post, a beam inside a shed, a tree stump that has been sitting there for years. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would make you suspect an entire city exists within. But behind that layer of wood lies another world. Passageways branching into more passageways. Chambers leading to more chambers. Thousands of residents living together in the dark. No windows. No light. No individual capable of seeing the entire picture. And yet everything functions with near-perfect efficiency. Larvae are cared for. Eggs are moved to areas with the right temperature. Food gathered during nightly patrols is continuously transported back to the center of the colony. New tunnels are expanded. Old sections are abandoned. What is truly remarkable is that no one is giving orders. There is no architect, no chief engineer, no manager standing at the center of the city. Each individual simply performs its task. But when thousands of individuals do the same thing at once, the result is one of the most complex societies nature has ever created. A city operating continuously, 24 hours a day, hidden inside the very wood you walk past hundreds of times each year. And that is exactly why so many people misunderstand them. Because when we see a pile of sawdust beneath a wall, we only see the result. We do not see the story behind it. But that story is not over yet, because there is one final twist that many homeowners have never considered. What is attracting them is the real story. Imagine that one day you discover carpenter ants around your home. You eliminate them. You spray insecticide. You seal the entry points. A few weeks later, not a single ant remains. The problem appears to be solved. But what if the wood is still holding moisture? What if the leak is still there? What if the decay is still quietly spreading inside? At that point, the black workers may no longer be visible. But the reason they appeared in the first place remains exactly the same. And that is the biggest twist in this entire story. Because up until now, you may have thought this video was about carpenter ants. In reality, it is not. This video is about the things they notice before we do. Moisture, decay, the subtle changes taking place inside wood, the earliest signs of time and nature at work. These tiny workers are not heroes, but they are not villains either. Many times they are simply messengers. And like every messenger throughout history, removing the messenger does not change the message. It only prevents you from hearing it. And that is why the pile of sawdust beneath a wall may mean something completely different after today. Not a sign of an attack, but a reminder that something inside the wood is asking for your attention. The next time you notice a small pile of sawdust beneath a fence, a few black workers disappearing into a crack in a porch post, or a line of ants moving along a wall you have never really paid attention to before, pause for a moment. Do not immediately ask how to get rid of them. Ask yourself a different question. Why are they there? Because after everything we have discovered today, you may have realized something that many homeowners miss. These tiny residents do not seek out healthy places. They do not choose at random. They are drawn to things that are changing, things that are weakening, places where time, moisture, and nature have already begun to quietly leave their mark. And that is why their presence is often worth listening to, rather than fearing. In the forest, they are cleaners. Inside aging trees, they are recyclers. And around your home, many times, they are messengers. The message is not always bad news, but it is almost always a message worth paying attention to. There is something remarkable about that idea, that a tiny creature most people see only as a pest can reveal stories unfolding inside wood that we cannot see for ourselves. Stories about time, about decay, about the way nature always finds the first weak points. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of today. Carpenter ants are not the destroyers of your home, at least not in the way most people believe. Many times they are simply the first to discover what is destroying it. And if you take the time to observe instead of reacting immediately, you may spot the problem before it becomes a crisis. Because sometimes, the most important signals in life do not come from dramatic events. They come from a small pile of sawdust resting quietly beneath a wall, from a trail of ants appearing in the evening light, from things we have walked past hundreds of times without ever truly noticing. And like so many of the creatures we have explored on this channel, the story of carpenter ants is not a story of destruction. It is a story about seeing something we once misunderstood. If you have ever found carpenter ants around your home, or if they have ever made you worry, share your story in the comments below. I read every single comment. And many of the best stories on this channel begin with small creatures that people thought they already understood. And if today is the day you started looking at these tiny workers in a different way, then perhaps something has just changed in the way you see the natural world around you. And small changes like that are exactly why this community exists. I'll see you in the next story.